I am Olivia, 28 years old. I should have known from the way she looked at me, like a mirror cracking beneath too much pressure. The garden was dressed in golden lights. Strings of fairy bulbs flickered above our heads, dancing in the soft wind like fireflies that had lost their way. Someone's child was chasing bubbles near the fountain. The buffet tables glistened with silver chafing dishes. Laughter hung in the air, woven with the scent of jasmine and freshly fried samosas. I had just stepped out of a conversation with one of Amir's uncles. He had been congratulating me again on my promotion. I smiled politely, repeating the practiced humility I'd learned over the years. "Oh, it's all teamwork," I'd said, but inside I was proud. Not for the title, Senior Regional Manager, but for surviving the silent sacrifices that no one ever sees. Then I caught her gaze across the lawn. Natsia, my younger sister, draped in a pastel pink lehenga, hair in soft curls, face powdered into something almost childlike. From afar, she looked like Grace. But I knew better. I knew the weight behind her eyes, the way they always looked just slightly unimpressed with me. She was holding a glass of water. I didn't think anything of it. Not even when she started walking toward me, face unreadable, steps too calm. Maybe she wants to say something, I thought. Maybe she's finally going to congratulate me. Sarah. She said my name the way someone says a word they've grown tired of. Before I could answer, before I could blink, I felt it. A chill exploded down my back. It wasn't just water. It was ice. It soaked through the silk of my sari, clung to my spine, stole the breath from my lungs. For a split second, I thought I had imagined it. That's how surreal it felt. But then the gasps came. First one, then a ripple across the lawn. Everyone turned. I stood frozen, water dripping from my hairline down the dip of my neck to the hem of my blouse. A glass rolled and clinked on the stone path at my feet, and Natsia just stood there, empty-handed, unapologetic, her eyes wide with something that almost looked like satisfaction, or maybe relief. "She always thinks she's better than everyone," she muttered, loud enough for the closest aunties to hear. "Now look at her, soaked like a street cat." The laughter didn't come, just more silence, thick and sharp. For a moment I couldn't breathe, not because of the cold, but because this humiliation had come from her, my own sister, my blood. And worse, I could see that no one was rushing to help. Not our mother, not our father, not the cousins or the neighbors or the people who used to hold me as a baby. Just stares, waiting to see what I would do. Would I scream, cry, slap her? I did none of those things. I just stood there, trembling, burning from the inside out while soaked to the skin. A strange stillness gripped my limbs, like my body didn't belong to me anymore. And then Amir stepped forward. I hadn't even seen him nearby. He'd been scrolling through his phone earlier, detached as always. But now he was standing between Natsia and me, his voice calm and low. "That was unnecessary," he said, his eyes locked on her. Natsia blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. This isn't high school. This is a family function. And that," he pointed at me without turning, "is your sister. Your elder sister. You should be ashamed. Something in his voice made the air colder than the water on my skin. He didn't shout. He didn't make a scene. But the way he looked at everyone, my parents included, was enough to turn a crowd of whispers into uneasy silence. He pulled off his suit jacket and draped it gently over my shoulders. "Let's go," he said, guiding me away without waiting for anyone's response. I wanted to cry. Not because of Natsia, not even because of the public shame, but because this moment, this small, quiet act, was the most Amir had stood up for me in months, maybe years. We walked past the lights and the music and the judgment, and still no one followed. Still no one said my name. Inside the car, the silence grew heavy again. My hands clutched the wet ends of my sari as I stared blankly out the window. I felt empty. "You okay?" Amir asked, without looking at me. "I don't know," I whispered, and I didn't know what hurt more, the water or the years that led up to it. The 1,000 ways Natsia had sliced at me before today. The way I had kept smiling through it, kept forgiving, kept believing she'd outgrow it. But she hadn't. And now I couldn't ignore it anymore. That glass of water had done more than drench me. It had made everything clear. This wasn't just a moment of jealousy. This was a war that had been waged in shadows, in whispers, in silence, and I had let it happen. But I wouldn't anymore. Something inside me cracked open that night. Not loud, not visible, but deep, quiet, permanent. And from that crack, something new would grow. When people talk about sisters, they often describe best friends made by blood, late-night secrets, shared wardrobes, inside jokes whispered behind closed doors. That was never us. Growing up, I was the older one, the responsible one. Natsia was the firework, the tantrum, the story that never stayed quiet. I was the quiet moon orbiting around her chaos, always adjusting my light so she could shine without burning out. It started early. I remember once when we were children, she broke my favorite music box. A tiny thing from a local fair, with a ballerina that spun when you wound it. I cried. She didn't apologize. My mother sat me down, brushing my tears aside like crumbs on the table. "Sarah, Beta, you're the elder. You need to understand. Natsia is sensitive." That word would follow me for decades. Sensitive. It meant volatile. It meant easily bruised. It meant she got to throw the glass, and I was expected to sweep up the pieces, and I did. When we got older, it only got more complicated. I was offered a scholarship to study economics abroad. My dream. But that same year, Natsia got engaged. Young, impulsively, to a man who promised the world with empty hands. Our father pulled me aside one night, the smell of his chai still on his breath. "Sarah, you're smart. You'll find another way. But right now, we need to focus on Natsia's wedding." I nodded. Of course. What else could I do? I deferred the scholarship. Then I never applied again. That night, I told myself I was being mature. I told myself sacrifice was the currency of love. But some nights, when the house was asleep and the wind rattled the windows, I felt something sour settle in my chest, something like grief. Only I didn't know what I had lost yet. After Natsia's marriage crumbled, predictably, painfully, she moved back in with our parents, a curled-up shadow of herself at first, but within months, the sharp edges returned. Bitterness wrapped around her like a new skin. I thought time would soften her. It didn't. Every success I earned became a stain in her eyes. When I bought my first car, she said I was showing off. When I got promoted, she said it was because I flirted with my boss. At every turn, she found a way to reduce what I had fought for. And yet, my parents never stepped in, never asked her to stop. They said she was still healing, as if healing gave her permission to hurt others. Then there was Amir. We met in a shared project at work, both of us still climbing the early rungs of our careers. He liked that I was organized, thoughtful. He called me the calm in the storm during one of our late-night calls. I fell for that version of us, the quiet support, the intellectual connection, the way he used to pour me tea before I even asked for it. He wasn't like other men in our circle. He didn't demand attention or act entitled. He listened, at least in the beginning. Our first few years of marriage were peaceful. We moved into a modest apartment. He encouraged me to keep working. He even bragged about me to his friends, but slowly the pride faded. He became withdrawn, distracted. I'd come home with stories from the office, how I handled a difficult negotiation or landed a deal, and he'd barely look up from his phone. He stopped asking questions, stopped noticing things, stopped seeing me. I chalked it up to stress. Deadlines, routine. We were adults after all. Love wasn't supposed to feel like fireworks forever. Still, I kept showing up. For him, for my parents, for Natsia. The day I got promoted to senior regional manager, I drove straight to my parents' house. I brought sweets. I thought, maybe this time they'd be proud. Maybe Natsia would see me differently. She barely looked up, just rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, you finally got it." No congratulations, no smile. Just that same invisible knife, slipping between my ribs the way she always managed to. I smiled through it, of course. That's what I was trained to do. It wasn't until the water soaked through my blouse, in front of our entire family, that I realized how deeply I'd allowed silence to rot everything I loved. My sister didn't become cruel overnight. She had been planting seeds of resentment for years, and I kept watering them with my silence. Because I thought that was love. Because I thought choosing peace over truth was noble. But peace built on suppression is a dam, not a bridge. And dams break. That night, after the garden emptied and we returned home, I stood in front of the mirror in the bathroom. My sari was ruined. My hair had dried stiff. Amir had gone to bed without a word. I stared at myself for a long time. My reflection didn't look angry. It looked tired. Tired of being the balm for everyone else's wounds while mine festered beneath polished skin. Tired of folding myself small so others could feel big. Tired of calling this family. That moment, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't reach for the phone or the door. I just sat down on the cold tile floor and exhaled. A long, slow breath that felt like it had been waiting to leave me for years. I realized something then. I had never truly let myself feel angry. Not at Natsia, not at my parents, not even at Amir. But I was angry now, and anger, I learned, can be clarifying. It doesn't destroy, it reveals. It shows you what you've tolerated, what you've swallowed, what you've traded away just to be the good one. And maybe, finally, I was done being good. Maybe I was ready to be in the days that followed the family function. No one mentioned the water. No one talked about the way my body flinched when the chill hit my skin, or how I stood frozen, soaked, and humiliated, while Natsia smirked behind her fake tears. Instead, I got calls and messages from aunts and cousins saying things like, "Let it go, Beta. She didn't mean it. Don't ruin the family vibe over one emotional moment. She's just insecure. You're doing so well, mashallah." It was as if my dignity was a small price to pay for keeping the peace. Again, even Amir, the man who had, in that one moment, stood up for me, had retreated into himself. The next morning, he didn't mention what happened. He left for work early. No kiss, no words, not even a glance. That night, he came home late, claiming deadlines and traffic. He hadn't defended me. He'd defended the image of us. That night, after I washed the remnants of the soaked suri, I sat on the edge of the bathtub and stared at it hanging limply on the line. The fabric shimmered under the bathroom light, but it felt like a ghost of me. Delicate, ruined, discarded. I didn't cry. I just sat. Somewhere in my chest, a dam had cracked. The next few days blurred. My parents visited, mostly to scold. Me with smiles. "You know your sister didn't mean harm," my mother whispered while folding my laundry. "She's just always felt in your shadow. Be patient. You're the older one." I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded. When I walked into the kitchen that evening, Amir was scrolling through his phone while eating dinner I had cooked. He didn't look up. "You okay?" I asked. He shrugged. "Long day. You?" I could have said no. I'm not. "Okay. I'm unraveling inside my own skin. I don't recognize my life anymore." Instead, I said, "Same here." That night, I stared at my wedding ring as I lay in bed beside a man who now felt like a stranger. The silver band felt colder than usual. I slipped it off and placed it on the bedside table. Not permanently, just for a while. Just until I could remember why I wore it. At work, I thought things would be different. I'd always found safety in structure. Spreadsheets don't gaslight you. Numbers don't manipulate. But even there, a storm was brewing. A new male colleague, Ramiz, had started interrupting me during meetings, taking credit for my ideas, speaking over me, making sly comments like, "Sarah's great with the details. Big picture stuff, though. We'll handle that." It wasn't just at home. I was invisible everywhere. I found myself withdrawing from friends, from team lunches, from joy. I sat in meetings and took notes out of habit. I went through the motions at home like a well-oiled machine. Cook, clean, respond, numb, repeat. One evening, after a long day of being dismissed and diminished, I came home to find Natsia sitting on my couch. She looked up with red-rimmed eyes and a crooked smile. Ami said you're mad at me. I didn't reply. She sniffled. I don't know why everyone's acting like I'm the villain. I'm just tired of always being second best. I stared at her, this woman I had once pushed on swings, defended in school fights, given my dreams away for. Something inside me cracked wide open. You poured water on me in front of 50 people. She blinked. It was a joke. It was humiliation, I said, my voice quiet, steady. And you've been humiliating me in small ways your whole life. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then rolled her eyes. Wow. Okay, drama queen. She walked out. I didn't follow. That night, I opened the old wooden drawer beside my bed. Inside, tucked between books I hadn't touched in years, was a journal. Leather-bound, untouched since the year I got married. Its pages were blank, waiting. I picked up a pen and for the first time in years, I let the truth pour out. I don't know who I am anymore, I wrote, and then, I think I've spent my whole life being what everyone needed me to be. Quiet, kind, generous, strong. But no one ever stopped to ask what I needed. Not even me. I wrote until my fingers cramped, until the ache in my chest felt just a little lighter. I wrote about Natsia, about my mother's silence, my father's expectations, Amir's absence, Ramiz's arrogance. I wrote about the way my soul had shrunk inside this life I had built out of duty. I wrote until I finally admitted something I had never said aloud, not even in my own mind. I don't feel loved. I feel used. And somewhere between those lines, a quiet, terrifying question emerged. What if the only way to find myself is to let go of everything that's breaking me? I stared at that question for a long time. My heart raced, but I didn't look away. The next morning, I didn't put my ring back on. I didn't cook breakfast. I didn't text Amir updates or call my mother to check in. I opened the windows. I let sunlight into the corners of the house that had long sat in shadow. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called in sick. I made a cup of tea, just for myself, sat on the balcony, and breathed. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't revenge. It was relief. The first taste of something real. The flood had come. But maybe, just maybe, I was still standing. I didn't leave a goodbye, just a note on the kitchen table, written in the same calm handwriting I had used all my life to ask for peace, to apologize, to explain away everyone else's cruelty. This time, it simply said, I need space. I'm safe. Don't look for me. I packed lightly. A few clothes, my journal, my sketchbook, dusty from neglect. No makeup, no heels, no jewelry, not even my wedding ring. The drive to the hill station felt surreal. As the city faded behind me, the noise in my chest started to quiet. For the first time in years, I didn't have to perform. I didn't have to be a daughter, a wife, a sister, a professional. I could just be a person breathing. The town I chose was small and tucked away, an old colonial settlement turned retreat spot, perched between pine forests and fog. I booked a guest house under a fake name, Amira. I liked the way it sounded, soft but strong. The woman who greeted me at the gate was in her late 60s, with silver-streaked hair tied in a bun and eyes that had clearly seen more than most. She introduced herself as Meher Auntie. "You're running," she said simply, pouring me tea without asking. "I won't ask from what. Just know that you're welcome to stay as long as the mountain lets you." Something in me cracked at her. Kindness. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was without condition. Her guest house was old but warm. Wooden floors that creaked, floral quilts that smelled of eucalyptus, and windows that opened into clouds. Time moved differently there. Slower. Softer. I slept for 2 days. Woke only to eat the hot, simple meals she left by the door. The silence was disorienting at first, like I'd stepped out of a hurricane only to realize I'd been carrying the storm inside me. By the 3rd day, I sat outside on a bench and wrote in my journal, "I don't miss them. I miss who I was before they convinced me I had to shrink." Each morning, I took long walks through mossy paths, pine cones crunching beneath my shoes. I started sketching again. First the trees, then my hands, then a blurry self-portrait. I wasn't good, but it didn't matter. One afternoon, Meher, Auntie brought out a stack of old letters, things I wrote and never sent. She said with a small smile, "Try it. Write like no one's going to read." So I did. I wrote to Amir. I wrote to Nadia. I wrote to my younger self. In one letter I scribbled, "I'm sorry I kept asking others to love you the way you deserved, instead of learning to love you myself." I cried after that one. But the crying wasn't weakness. It was release. Like water finding its way out after years of being dammed. Meher Auntie and I began having long tea sessions at dusk. We rarely spoke of details, but she knew how to draw out the ache with simple questions. "What do you miss the most? Who told you that you had to be small to be good? Why do you think silence is kindness?" One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the misted ridges, she said, "The people who silence you don't deserve your voice." Her words struck me harder than anything Nadia had ever screamed, because they were true. I'd thought my silence was noble. That swallowing, pain made me strong. That not reacting made me mature. But I had mistaken endurance for identity, and I was tired of enduring. By the end of the week, I'd stopped checking my phone. There were texts from Amir, short, emotionless things. "Where are you? Come back. We need to talk." It's not that big of a deal. Not once did he ask how I was, and that said everything. I no longer wanted to be in rooms where I had to explain my worth. I didn't respond. Instead, I painted. I sat in the sun and let it touch the parts of me that had been starved for warmth. I read poems aloud to no one. I walked barefoot on dewy grass just to feel something. For the first time in years, I felt like my body belonged to me. Not as a tool for productivity, not as a vessel for other people's needs, but as home. I had built my life like a house with no walls, open for everyone else's mess, always rearranged to fit someone else's comfort. Here, in the quiet arms of the hills, I began rebuilding. one breath at a time. One evening, just before dinner, I sat with Meher Auntie watching the fireflies blink against the darkening sky. She placed a hand on mine and said, "You know you'll have to go back, not to them, but to yourself." I nodded. I wasn't ready yet, but I would be, not to return to my old life, but to rise from it. I didn't return home. Not to the house Amir and I once shared, not to my parents' suffocating silence. I returned to the city as someone else, someone unfinished, but real. I rented a small 2-room apartment with peeling wallpaper and creaky floors, but it was mine. The air smelled like possibility. I remember the first morning in that space. I woke up to sunlight spilling across my bed in patterns I hadn't seen in years. I stood barefoot on the cold floor and looked at myself in the mirror, hair messy, eyes swollen from sleep, but present. There was no noise around me, no one needing, no one draining, only me. That day I went back to work, not because I was healed, but because I was reclaiming my rhythm. The office buzzed with its usual chaos, but I didn't shrink. When the same male colleague who always interrupted me tried to speak over me in a meeting, I raised my hand calmly and said, "Please wait, I wasn't finished." It was the first time my voice didn't tremble. Later that week, I enrolled in an evening art class, charcoal drawing, Tuesdays and Thursdays. The first time I touched the paper, my hand shook, but I didn't stop. Something about creating beauty from black dust felt poetic. Like healing wasn't about becoming new, it was about revealing what had always been hidden beneath the smudges. I started therapy too. The sessions were messy, raw. Some weeks I said nothing. Other weeks I unraveled like thread. My therapist told me, "You were trained to disappear, but your anger is sacred. Let it speak." So I did. I began to see patterns. How Amir's kindness had always come with invisible strings. How he'd track my expenses under the guise of responsibility. How every time I celebrated a win, he'd sulk or pick a fight. I had called it tension. I now understood it as control. It wasn't loud. It was cold. Quiet sabotage. Guilt masked as care. Freedom repackaged as burden. I went through old emails, bank records, messages. I documented everything. Every time he withheld money under the pretense of budgeting. Every subtle gaslight. "Are you sure you remember that right?" Or, "You're always so sensitive." It was all there. Pieces of a puzzle I never gave myself permission to put together. I bought a small wooden box. Inside it, I placed 2 things. My soaked sari from the function. My wedding ring. They sat beside each other, symbols of who I had been. A woman dressed in duty, drenched in humiliation, clinging to a bond that had long rusted over. I didn't cry. Not this time. Meanwhile, Natsia tried to reclaim her role in the family drama. She posted cryptic quotes about being misunderstood, gave tearful performances at dinners I no longer attended, and whispered stories about my abandonment. But something had shifted. People were listening differently. Not all of them, but some. My uncle called to ask how I was. My aunt sent a message that simply said, "I'm proud of you." Small tremors in the facade Natsia had long controlled. Watched quietly. I didn't correct the rumors. I didn't explain my absence. Sometimes silence isn't surrender. It's strategy. And while she spun stories, I built truth. I met with a lawyer, an old friend of a friend who treated me like a person, not a case. She read the documents I brought and nodded slowly. "You've been living in a cage without bars," she said. "It's time to open the door." We filed for divorce, quietly, precisely. Amir hadn't reached out since I stopped responding. That told me everything. I expected fear, but all I felt was clarity. I even bought a new phone number, gave it only to a few trusted people. I wasn't disappearing. I was redesigning my life with intention. One day, during a therapy session, I said, "I don't want revenge." My therapist smiled. "That's because you're reclaiming power, not giving it away. That's different." But I did want accountability and closure, and so I waited. Not passively, but with purpose. I stopped bending. I stopped apologizing for the space I took up. I stopped dimming the light that had always made my sister squint. I started becoming. At work, I led a project without asking permission. When it succeeded, I shared the credit with my team. But privately, I celebrated myself. I bought a small gold ring, thin, simple, elegant. A ring I chose. A symbol not of marriage, but of self-commitment. In my new apartment, I placed it on my bedside table next to a candle and a framed sketch I'd drawn. A woman walking away from a house engulfed in shadows. That woman in the drawing. She looked like me, but taller, straighter, braver. And in the mirror I started to see her too. I was no longer surviving. I was shifting. I was building something they couldn't touch, because it didn't depend on them anymore. Not my worth. Not my joy. Not my voice. The final step wasn't confrontation. Not yet. But it was coming. And this time, I wouldn't come trembling. I would come whole. The hall looked exactly the same. Same garlands of marigold strung along the door frames. Same long buffet table covered with silver lids and hopeful laughter. Same people, clutching their chai cups, weaving stories between bites of samosa and glances across the room, but I wasn't the same. I arrived alone. In a crisp, deep blue sari, the color of distant storms and calm seas. My hair was pinned in a low, elegant knot. A single silver bangle shimmered on my wrist. I wore no wedding ring, no apologies. For the first time, I didn't shrink as I walked in. My heels tapped against the marble floor with assurance. A few heads turned. I met their eyes without blinking. Even the air seemed to hesitate. Natsia spotted me first. She floated across the room with her usual saccharine smile, arms open like nothing had happened, as if she hadn't doused me in ice water just months ago, as if she hadn't doused me in envy for decades. "Sarah, you look so strong," she said, lacing her voice with faux affection. I didn't pretend. I didn't hug back. I smiled politely. "I am." And then, with an audience not of my choosing but of fate's design, I said it. "Do you remember the last time we were all here?" The room quieted. Conversations dimmed. Natsia's smile faltered. You poured water on me, I continued. In front of everyone, she laughed nervously. Sarah, please, that was just a joke. You know how I get sometimes. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. It wasn't a joke. It was cruelty dressed as humor. And it wasn't the first time. I turned slightly so others could hear, so the truth wouldn't hide again. You've been undermining me since we were children. I gave up dreams so you could shine. I tolerated your tantrums, your manipulation, your victimhood. And everyone, this family, let it happen. No one protected me. Not when I gave up college, not when I came home crying, not when you soaked me in shame. The silence thickened. I let it breathe. You all taught me to stay quiet. You said it was noble, but what you really meant was convenient. My mother stepped forward, her voice soft and trembling. Beta, it's not good to bring up the past. This isn't about blame, I interrupted. It's about boundaries. Natsia opened her mouth to speak, but I looked her dead in the eye. You don't get to narrate my life anymore. You don't get to be the loudest one in the room and expect everyone else to whisper. I'm done whispering. I turned back to the others. I'm getting divorced. A gasp, a sharp intake of breath from an aunt, a shifting of weight from an uncle. But I stood steady. Amir and I are done. I'm rebuilding my life, and I'm not asking for approval. I'm not broken. I'm free. I could feel their discomfort, their judgment rising, but I was no longer afraid of it. I welcomed it, because it meant they finally saw me. Not their reflection of me, but me. One cousin tried to lighten the moment. Maybe it's just a phase. You know, women go through changes. I looked at him, tired, condescending, small in spirit. I haven't changed, I said. I've returned to myself. And then I walked away. No drama, no tears, just truth, laid gently like a blade across a table, sharp and undeniable. A week later, I met Amir for the last time. The lawyer's office was cold, quiet, with a ticking clock. That sounded louder than it should have. He looked different. Not older, just deflated. You're sure about this? He asked, scanning the divorce papers. His voice held something. Regret, maybe. Or just the discomfort of consequences. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the man I once loved. The man who smiled wide at our wedding, who placed a gentle hand on my lower back as we mingled through crowds. I saw the man who slowly dulled my light in the name of responsibility, who praised me when it suited him and vanished when it didn't. I've never been more sure of anything, I said. He signed. And just like that, the thread snapped as I stepped outside. The sky had opened. Rain poured from the heavens in soft, rhythmic waves. The kind of rain that usually makes you run, makes you cover your hair, shield your face. But I didn't move. I tilted my head back, closed my eyes, and let it fall. Water. Again. But this time, it wasn't cold humiliation. It was cleansing. I stood in it until I was soaked, my sari clinging to my skin, my breath rising in quiet clouds. People passed with umbrellas. A few looked at me, puzzled. I didn't care. Let them look. The rain didn't shame me now. It baptized me. That night, I opened my small wooden box. I took out the soaked sari, unfolded it gently. The smell of that day had faded, but the memory lingered. I placed it in a donation bag. I took out the wedding ring. Looked at it one last time, and I dropped it in a small river the next morning. No anger, no ceremony, just release. I live differently now. I drink coffee alone in cafes and smile at strangers. I sketch faces on trains. I answer only to myself. I laugh louder. I say no without explanation. I light candles for no reason at all. I still visit my family sometimes. Some dynamics don't change. But I do, and that's enough. People still ask about Nadia. She's still the same. But I no longer bend to make her feel tall. She can be her story. I'll be mine, and mine is finally mine. Because when the water clears, when it stops flooding you and starts freeing you, you begin again. Not as a victim, not as a survivor, but as a woman reborn.